The central theme of Prey is choice. Both the gameplay and the narrative are focused on the choices you make as a player. However, as the title of this video suggests, the game struggles at times to give the player full control over the outcome, as some choices go unrewarded and others come close to breaking the game altogether. Nevertheless, there is an immense amount of freedom in handling simple decisions, from advancing to the next area or combating enemies, as the game does reward players aware of their environments who think in a creative way. At first, I didn't know how to feel about Prey. I didn't know if it was innovative or stupid. I didn't know if it was challenging or frustrating. I didn't know if it was a successful blending of several diverse gameplay elements, or if it was a jumbled mess that's unfocused. But I spent so much time thinking about it, and despite turning it off many nights in sheer agony, I would spend the entire next day itching to play it again. Prey definitely executes some elements very well, but other elements just don't seem to work, sometimes laughably so. And I understand completely the mixed reviews it received upon its release, but I can also see why some people considered it one of the better games of 2017. After playing through it 3 times for over 80 hours, I can safely say, no matter what your personal feelings are about it, it warrants some serious discussion. So let's take a look. The main character of the game is Morgan Yu. You can choose whether Morgan is male or female, although there's no dialogue on your part and the game is always in first person. So what does it matter anyway? Well, actually, you can watch and listen to recorded messages and pictures of Morgan, and it does affect the voice of January, so all jokes aside, it does have an impact. You begin your day in your apartment, with your first objective being to put on your TranStar uniform and head up to the roof. Knowing this game was marketed as a horror game, the opening can be ominous because you're expecting something to jump up and kill you, or something to go horribly wrong, or something like that. But nothing's wrong, it's just you in your apartment. Or should I say, you in his apartment. Sorry. I spent a little longer than I probably should have looking around at everything, reading the emails on the workstation, getting a feel for the item manipulation, but ultimately you get dressed and head up to the roof where a chopper is waiting for you to take you to work. So you board the chopper and watch one of the cooler, more stylish opening credits scenes I've seen in a game.
78 degrees, clear skies all the way. That's a nice view on the bay there.
When you arrive at TranStar headquarters, you are greeted by your brother and CEO Alex Yu. Alex explains that you'll be undergoing some unconventional testing before you are sent up to Talos 1, a research facility in space. When you begin the test, you can tell something's wrong. Aside from Dr. Bellamy asking you to do strange things like hide in plain sight, the scientists comment on your performance with perplexity, like they don't understand why it is you're doing what you're doing. All of a sudden, a mysterious creature disguised as a coffee mug attacks the scientists. The room fills with poison gas, and you're unconscious. You wake up once more in your apartment, although something is very clearly wrong. Even though the room is the same, there are major differences in mood and atmosphere. While the first sequence was silent, there's now a haunting musical cue reverberating throughout. Checking the workstation doesn't show the original emails, but instead an emergency message telling you to get out. Going into the hallway, you'll see the maintenance worker is dead, and when you pick up her wrench, someone named January contacts you and tells you to break out of your apartment. So I walked over to the window and smashed through, only to find I'm not in an apartment at all. This sets a great tone for the game. Nothing is what it seems. And already you begin to question everything, which in my opinion is a great game design, adding anxiety to every aspect. However, a theme of this video will be that for every aspect Prey executes well, I can also see how it doesn't execute it well at the same time. And this opening is the first example. The whole looking glass, life is but a dream concept is interesting, but here it doesn't so much work because you spend way too little time with it. Maybe half an hour tops, but I would guess most players probably spend only 15 minutes in the opening, so it's nowhere near as compelling as it could have been. Maybe have the player relive the same day 3 times with little subtle changes here and there would have given that Groundhog Day feel, and that big reveal of it all just being a simulation would have much more weight than it does here. So you go through what you realize is the simulation lab, where the scientists controlled and monitored every aspect of your daily life. The equipment looks quite sophisticated, and even if you don't have any scientific knowledge like myself, you can tell the developers put a lot of time and effort into making it look realistic. Interacting with the workstation in the lobby lets you see just how the scientists were able to make the simulation fit whatever Morgan was supposed to do that day. The apartment lobby and the TranStar lobby were actually the same room, and the helicopter ride you took wasn't a ride at all. You never went anywhere. When you pass by the testing rooms, you see the creature that ended your test the day before. January tells you it's a mimic and to be careful what you pick up. Mimics introduce one of the most unique elements to the game and set Prey apart from other action adventures. Normally, you pick up loot and other objects to progress your character or stay alive, but because any object in the game could potentially be a mimic in disguise means treading around with caution instead of just picking up every object you need. You have to be aware of your surroundings and look out for irregularities like a garbage can out of place, 1 too many gas canisters clumped together, or 3 chairs at a desk for 2 people, something like that. The way mimics behave during combat make them a challenging enemy because of their ability to quickly move around, sometimes even climbing on walls. Their AI makes them unpredictable as well. They'll leap at you suddenly or use their whip attack from range. Once you acquire a psychoscope later in the game, you can detect hidden mimics with the scanner, making them much less of a threat. But until you reach that point, mimics prove to be one of the more unique elements in a first-person shooter. After you advance through the Neuromod division and reach the lobby, you are given your first real look at the world. You're already on Talos 1. You've been for quite some time. You'll find out later just why exactly, but this reveal was really cool and added to the "nothing is what it seems" motif. Unfortunately, it's at this point the story stops being really compelling, which is a problem considering we're only about an hour or so in. But as a concession, this is the point where the best aspect of the game takes center stage. I mentioned before how I consider every aspect of Prey to be considered both well and poorly executed. The one exception to this is the exploration of Talos 1. The most fun I had was simply wandering around, discovering creative and interesting ways to explore the station and reach new areas. There is not a single negative thing I have to say about the freedom to get around however you choose. On a side note, this is the point in the video where the gameplay and story will start to get completely spoiled. So if you're interested in what you've seen so far and want to try it, now's the time to stop, so consider yourself warned. What makes the exploration of Talos 1 so enjoyable is the rich, concentrated design of each area, and the freedom provided to access those areas in many ways. Instead of just looking straight ahead of you the whole time, you're rewarded by looking above and below you too. And when I say rewarded, I don't just mean with loot or helpful objects, but also with access to other areas otherwise inaccessible. Creativity comes into play because you aren't limited to the jumping and movement mechanics while exploring. Exploration is also tied into neuromods, weapons, hacking, and repairing. If it looks like you can't get in the front door, chances are you can still get in another way. For example, if you've invested neuromods into hacking, you can simply hack a door granting you access. If your hacking skill isn't high enough to get into a grav shaft, you can construct a makeshift staircase with the glue cannon and scale the wall to get to the top. If there's an unpowered door you need to get through, you can climb through a ventilation shaft, dropping you down to the other side. If there's a boarded up door, you can use mimic matter to become a small enough object and roll your way through the opening. If a door requires a key card that you haven't found yet, you can use remote manipulation to press the button on the other side, unlocking the door. Or you can fire a dart with the bolt caster through an opening in the glass to hit the button, unlocking the door. If there are several large objects blocking the way, you can use the leverage ability to lift said objects, or you can throw a recycling charge into the debris, swallowing everything up, allowing you to pass. Or you can use the repair skill to activate a grav shaft, taking you to another area. I could go on and on and on about the freedom given in handling situations, but to avoid rambling, just know that this aspect defined my experience and made it so enjoyable for me. Another cool aspect of exploration is that every item in the world has a purpose, a value, both intrinsic and extrinsic. Of course, items like medkits and ammo are useful in their own right, but they have even more potential benefits because of recycling, and these items are littered all over the environment. And this goes back to what I was saying about the players being rewarded by using creativity and thinking to explore. This is the game's crafting system. Items placed in the recycler will be converted into material used in the fabrication of other items, from exotic material extracted from the Typhon to mineral material extracted from ammo and other metals. This gives every piece of junk in the game value, which makes inventory management so important. The complement to recyclers are fabricators. You can use the materials you obtain from recycling to craft objects that you found fabrication plans for. You can craft weapons, bullets, and medkits, which are essential if playing on nightmare difficulty without using Neuromods, or you can simply craft Neuromods, which will make you a powerful force. Fabrication plans are found all over the world, again rewarding the player who is deft at exploration. Now, since I keep mentioning Neuromods, it's best to explain what the hell I'm talking about. Part of the research on Talos 1 concerns concentrating specific human abilities into devices that are used by people without those abilities in order to obtain said abilities. In other words, the world's greatest piano player can have the ability extracted, and someone who has never played piano in their life can jack in that ability and will have the knowledge of being the world's greatest piano player. If that ability is extracted, however, that person's mind will be restored to the exact moment before they installed the ability. This is what's been happening to Morgan. He or she has been in the simulation with TranStar continuously installing and extracting different Neuromods daily in order to understand and defeat the Typhon, the alien species in the game. That's the reason Morgan has been reliving the same day over and over again with no memory of what's been happening. The Typhon broke containment, however, hence the attack during testing, and now Morgan must fight off the Typhon before they take over Talos 1. Within the context of gameplay, Neuromods are the game's progression system, but not in the typical sense. Normally you gain experience points from your actions during gameplay to progress and upgrade your character, but there are no experience points in Prey. Instead, Neuromods are either found in the world or fabricated, which we'll get into later. There are two types of Neuromod abilities, Human and Typhon. Like I said before, Neuromods can grant the ability to lift heavy objects, repair items, hack terminals, transform, manipulate objects, etc. But Neuromods are also tied into combat, which can slow time, create thermal energy or a kinetic blast, create a phantom from a dead corpse that will fight alongside you, so Neuromods are an integral part of the game. However, part of the freedom of choice means you don't necessarily have to install Neuromods if you don't want to, and I played through the entire game on Nightmare difficulty doing just that. Although for the most part I was able to still use creativity and thinking to get around, the game became extremely tedious because I had hardly any inventory space, forcing me to keep running back and forth to a recycler every 5 seconds. There were also two key moments where the game failed to account for this choice. The first was an escape pod I came across while trying to locate every single TranStar employee. Someone was in there, but the only way to get inside was to repair the terminal, which I couldn't since I didn't invest any Neuromods into the repair skill, so I was locked out. But the second and extremely infuriating case was during the section where you have to reactivate the power in the reactor room. During the reboot, the staircase gets demolished, so the only way back up is through the grav shaft, which is inaccessible unless you can repair it, which again, I couldn't. So I had to use the glue gun to climb all the way up several stories high, while there were 2 technopaths with turrets attached trying to kill me. All of this made for an absolutely terrible immersion-breaking sequence. Since the exploration elements are such a success in my opinion, it would seem natural that the world design in Prey is excellent as well, and don't get me wrong, it's really good. A ton of thought went into crafting Talos 1 both inside and out. There's some insane attention to detail, like how the Earth and Moon move in their respective orbits, and the shadows your player casts even at extremely long draw distances. The intricate and detailed layout from within is the same when you're hovering around in zero gravity. Many sections have airlocks that must be opened from the inside first, but once they are, you can enter that area from space. The lift acts as a form of fast travel and will take you from one end of the ship to the other. The gut is a large maintenance tunnel connecting much of the ship, which you can then use to travel around in. But my biggest point of contention with Talos 1 is the backtracking. Because of its sheer size, it can be tedious to go from one area to the other. especially during the sections of the game when the lift isn't operational and when Alex locks everything down. On top of it all, long loading screens separate each area you enter, creating tons of downtime. The atmosphere of Prey is a mixed bag as well. I hold style in high regard when analyzing games, really any form of entertainment. It's what separates a game from others in its genre, and there are times when Prey is stylish and others when it's dull. One element of style that was welcomed were the intellectual aspects to almost everything. It's fitting because you are on a ship filled with scientists after all, but the emphasis on thinking is prevalent everywhere, from articles you can read about Fermi's paradox and human consciousness being explained in scientific terms, to the research you can perform, then study concerning the Typhon. It made the game much more than a typical action-adventure. The opening credit sequence sort of teased me because I thought the whole game would be this stylish, and would contain synthwave music throughout, which I love by the way, but there's not much music at all. A handful of flourishes here and there, but they don't last very long, except during combat, and the score isn't particularly good in my opinion. Now the music that plays from the speakers is really good and atmospheric. I wish it was always or almost always playing. It just feels like there's something missing, maybe some color in the environments. Even though they are very detailed, the facilities of Talos 1 end up looking very similar to one another. But with all that said, there are some really cool and stylish sequences. So now it's time to talk about combat, my biggest source of frustration. It's unfair to classify Prey as a first-person shooter because the connotations that come with it are that it's like Call of Duty, and it's not. Unless you've progressed far enough to upgrade your weapons and abilities, you can't simply run and gun your way through the Typhon. My first impression of combat was awful really, because I for one fell into that misconception about first-person shooters. But after several hours I realized that you're meant to treat combat the same way you treat exploration. The game rewards creativity and thinking. This is my first encounter with a Phantom, at which I only had the wrench and the glue gun. Wow. The first several hours are filled with these moments, dying over and over again because I wasn't playing by its rules. Weapons in the game are more like tools. With the exception of the shotgun and the pistol, every other weapon in the game serves more than one purpose. The wrench can be used as a blunt object, but can also break through glass so you can enter an area. The stun gun can knock humans unconscious and down robotic enemies, but it can also power up terminals. EMP charges have the opposite effect and can disable electronics. The glue cannon stops almost all enemies in their tracks, making them much more vulnerable to damage, and as you've seen, will also construct makeshift stairs to climb up walls, although I have to say the climbing mechanic is downright disgusting at times, as you fall off your glue rocks if you're not perfectly placed on them or if they're too small. The glue cannon also puts out fires and soaks up electrical damage, allowing you to pass by certain areas. Recycler charges will eliminate enemies altogether, but will also clear the way of obstructions. There are other tools at your disposal too, like the bolt caster, which can unlock doors by firing darts at their switches, null wave grenades, which stop a Typhon's psychic ability, making the fight much more manageable, and the Q beam, which emits a burst of energy that will explode enemies. There are two other elements to combat that should be mentioned, one good and one bad. During combat, your field of vision becomes dark and blurry, imitating the anxiety Morgan is feeling, which is appropriately called fear. Now, it's not the most groundbreaking feature ever, but it is cool enough to set it apart. Now, the bad is combat in zero gravity, which is awkward at best, downright clumsy at worst, especially when you're fighting smaller, more agile enemies where you tend to lose track of where they are. Aiming and connecting with your weapons can be imprecise to the point where you just straight up miss your target. Yeah, zero-G combat is kind of a mess. Now, what Prey does well in combat is the diversity of the enemies you'll be facing, which not only consists of Typhon, but also humans, operators, and turrets. Going back to what I was saying about weapons as tools, this also applies to fighting the Typhon. You have to know which tool to use against each enemy. On the defensive side, each Typhon deals its own attacks with varying degrees and sources of damage. Combining the offense and defense makes combat much more of a thinking game than it would seem, which harkens back to my point about not just being a typical first-person shooter. The Phantom is probably the second most common enemy after mimics, and aside from being extremely quick and able to fire long-range blasts in addition to their hand-to-hand strikes, they also come in three additional forms. Etheric, which can replicate mid-combat as well as deal residual damage when you step into their footprints. Thermal, which radiate dangerous heat as well as the ability to summon thermal blasts from range. And Voltaic, which emit violent electricity that damages you if you get too close. It's cool because Phantoms can cause electrical components to skitch out when they get close, adding to the atmosphere. And you can hear the Phantom's thoughts, which we'll explain why later, but it's cool because one thing they say is identical to the dialogue from the Talos 1 psychologist that I found on a transcribe during my exploration.
What does it look like? The shape in the glass.
Technopaths, aside from basically being bullet sponges, can control turrets to fight alongside them, and they can summon electric shocks that burst for about 10 seconds. Poltergeists are probably one of the more unique enemies because they remain hidden even while they're attacking you, so you have to kind of deduce where they are and fire at them blind. Apart from a lift attack that puts you vulnerable in the air, they also throw objects lying around the world that can kill you instantly. Weavers don't attack you directly and are pretty much defenseless, but when confronted, they release cystoids at you, which are basically little exploding kamikazes. I came to know Weavers as little bitches simply for that reason. It's all a lot to take in those first couple of hours with little experience, and I found myself taking damage and dying without even knowing what was hurting me. So you have to learn a lot from each enemy you face, and once you get the Psychoscope, you can collect data on each enemy you face, making combat that much easier. I alluded earlier to playing the game on Nightmare without Neuromods, and that's exactly how I would describe combat without them, a nightmare. No upgrades to your character and weapons combined with the lack of inventory space meant dying over and over again, especially when facing multiple enemies at once. It got to a point where towards the end of the game, I avoided combat entirely and just sped through as much as I could. But at the same time, maxing out on Neuromods, which becomes easy to do when you get the fabrication plans and can make them in bulk, do make your character slightly overpowered on enemies like Mimics and Phantoms. But the enemy AI is unpredictable for the most part, in a good way, so you still can't get by with just blasting your way through the game. But it's in this way that Neuromods have a mixed impact on combat. Have you noticed that I haven't spoken of the main story in quite a while? It's my opinion that Prey's narrative is built on a solid foundation, but constructed with Chinese drywall. In other words, the premise is great, but the actual plot isn't very compelling. The thing I found most interesting is that in this alternative universe, JFK actually survives his assassination, which spurs him to devote money and resources into the space race, which is in part responsible for Talos 1's existence. So we left off with Morgan getting contacted by January, and when you finally meet face to face, you discover that Morgan programmed January as a failsafe in case something like this ever happened, which of course it did. January says Morgan's orders are to destroy Talos 1, as the Typhon must never reach Earth. Along the way, Morgan is discouraged by Alex, who says that they are close to figuring out the Typhon and how to stop them, so they must be allowed to continue. This is the point where the theme of the game, choice, starts driving the narrative. Of course, the obvious choice to the player is whether or not Talos 1 should be saved or not, But along the way, you also have many other choices to make concerning supporting characters. Aside from choosing to just straight up kill them or not, you can also choose to help their cause or not. There's the shuttle Advent, which is earthbound but could possibly be transporting Typhon, so you must choose whether to remote detonate it or let the passengers live. Rescuing Dr. Igwe from his cargo container outside Talos 1 or let him die. Saving the prisoner in Psychotronics, who you learn did some horrible things but can still choose to release him if you want. Helping Michaela in both retrieving her medicine and also finding some answers about her father. There are lots more too, but just know that these are the areas where Prey successfully executes the freedom of choice. Where it limits the choices you make are just as prevalent though. Retrieving Dr. Igwe's music falls into this category because it's just a fetch quest. Yeah, I guess you're helping him out, which is noble, but there's little to no emotional weight involved. Come to think of it, most of the quests in the game, both main and side quests, can be summarized like this. Go do this so you can go do that. In other words, quests are treated as obstacles that you need to complete in order to advance, instead of compelling missions that keep the story going. You need to get through this area, but the cargo door needs to be unlocked from the inside, so go open the locks. Alex shut all the doors in Talos 1, so go to the reactor room and reboot the system. You need to go through Guts, but before you can, you need to finish running this experiment so you can unlock the door. You need to get into deep storage, but the door has a voice lock, so you need to get samples of Danielle's voice in order to unlock it. You need to watch this message you recorded for yourself, but the looking glass technology has been shut down, so you need to go reactivate it in Calvino's... Do you get the point? But actually, this isn't even the worst example of the faults in the story. There are two quests that completely fail to immerse the player and contribute limitations to your choices. The first concerns Will Mitchell. When you reach crew quarters, you are contacted by a mysterious, almost manic voice telling you that you aren't safe, and that there's something lurking. That thing is a telepath that's enslaved some members of Talos 1, and if you get too close to them, they suicide charge you with their exploding heads. When you neutralize the threat, you meet who you believe to be Will Mitchell, the Talos 1 chef, but he's acting all strange and cryptic. He asks you to go retrieve something from his room, a medal. But I already knew at this point that the man was an imposter. There's so much evidence pointing this out too. There's a transcribe revealing that the real Will Mitchell has a different face and voice. There's an email indicating that Morgan knew Will personally, whereas the imposter acts like they're meeting for the first time. There's even a picture of Morgan with the real Will Mitchell, but the face is all scratched off. And of course, if you run into Danielle, she'll straight up tell you that he's an imposter who killed Abby, her girlfriend. But you have no choice but to suffer along with the quest despite your knowledge that it's not the real Will. When you finally finish the quest, there is absolutely no payoff, no conclusion whatsoever. After all my exploration, finding all the evidence, I thought that there would be some epic showdown where the imposter goes off the rails and tries to kill you, or maybe tries to kill other members of Talos 1, or maybe he would sabotage the ship somehow and try to escape. No. You find him sitting in an escape pod doing absolutely nothing. There's no real choice to even make here. Either go in the pod, which triggers the recycle charge trap he set for you, or you can shoot him to death. That's it. But the biggest missed opportunity, in my opinion, concerns Alex's escape pod. During the game, you are contacted by December, another operator with artificial intelligence, similar to January but an older model. December tells you to escape Talos 1 on Alex's escape pod in the Arboretum. You have to go through some, yeah you guessed it, fetch quests in order to retrieve the pod key. But once you do, you have the option to leave Talos 1 behind. Or so I thought. Now I didn't do this during my first playthrough because it didn't fit the style I was roleplaying. But I went back to find out that boarding the pod leads to nothing. The game doesn't end here. Alex comes over the transcribe to express his disappointment in Morgan for leaving. Then a cutscene plays where Alex proclaims,
"We failed. This isn't the one."
Which results in a game over screen, and you have to reload. I thought this was an important decision to make, which ties into the theme of consequences and judgment, because this action could be seen as cold and uncaring. But instead, the game doesn't allow you to complete the game this way. It just seems like a huge missed opportunity. Before we get to the endings, I just want to point out that some of the writing concerning supporting and even faceless characters is pretty good. It's fun to read the notes written by other characters. The better storyline is Danielle's relationship with Abby. Even though you never really meet either one, at least not face to face, I found it interesting these two co-workers were secretly and then not so secretly in love.
Hi, Daddy! Happy birthday! I made you a present, but you'll have to open it when you get home because your company has lame rules. Guess what? I finally trotted with Lita. It was awesome. What else? Oh, Ren peed in one of your cowboy boots. Sorry. I really miss you. Tell Mr. Yu I said kids should be allowed in space. Well, I guess that's all for now. I love you. Mwah.
So before you reach the end, Commander Dahl boards Talos 1, and depending on if you've been righteous or evil, this will expand upon your choice to finish the game. Playing the game with empathy means Dahl will be dead set on killing you. If you've been killing everyone in sight, Dahl will instead try and recruit you. Although this is misdirection on his part. He really has orders, from your father by the way, to kill you regardless. At this point, you can either arm the Talos 1 self-destruct sequence, which, by the way, is backtracking personified, as you have to go through the lobby, through life support, through the power plant, down to the bottom of the reactor, arm the self-destruct sequence, then go back through all of that to the Arboretum, to the bridge, then activate the bomb, all while sitting through loading screens in between. I'm not joking. Or you can side with Alex and install a null wave transmitter that will neutralize the Typhon, allowing the research to continue. Either way, when you finally meet up with Alex face to face, this happens. Turns out the Typhon have been sending communications throughout the universe to the Apex, a massive alien that is engulfing Talos 1, and after doing so will almost certainly invade Earth. Now it's at this point that you may be completely disgusted with the way the game handles your choice to deal with Talos 1, because immediately after doing so, a short, and I do mean short, cutscene plays. Then the credits roll. The endings are so bad I laughed out loud the first time I beat the game. But in keeping with the theme I mentioned before, nothing is what it seems.
What is a neuromod? Well, it's both an easy answer and a complicated one at the same time. It is the future, today. More importantly, our past, today. This is the work TranStar does. Every employee working together. It's immortality, and it is beautiful.
So the game wasn't really over. There's one more twist they pulled out, and despite the fact that I thought it was appropriate, you might be even more disgusted with the whole Jacob's Ladder, it was all just a dream revelation. But it was. You were actually playing as a captured Typhon implanted with Morgan Yu's memories inside of a simulation. So in a way, the game comes full circle. The simulation from the beginning was just the tip of the iceberg. Alex did this to put human abilities into the Typhon to see how it would react. Would it be empathetic or still murderous? As it turns out, the Typhon have already invaded Earth, so Talos 1 is, in a way, the last hope for humanity. It's at this point the operators, playing the roles of Igwe, Elazar, Aleutian, and Sho, judge you based on your actions, which is the full realization of the player's choices in the game. Even actions you didn't think were that big of a deal are judged with the operators saying if they believe the Typhon should be allowed to live or not. Provided you weren't a complete psychopath, Alex offers his hand, giving the Typhon a chance, and you have your final choice to make. Take his hand and instill hope in humanity, or kill Alex and end that hope. Now that was a lot to take in, and as you can see, the game both excels and fails in the choices it gives to its players, and it's exemplified in the endings. Going through the game multiple times, the game does in fact account for the decisions you made and the consequences of those actions, even if the endings aren't fully executed as well as they could have been. And I think that summarizes Prey in the best possible way. It's a good game, just maybe not the game it could have been. While some aspects are executed really well, others just didn't seem to receive that same attention to detail. Was it frustrating? Yes. Was it a chore to play in certain areas? Of course. But was it also a joy to behold during others, completely immersing me in every possible way? Yes. And although the final product left me wanting more, it was still a fun game to experience, with hours and hours lost in the vivid, realized world of Talos 1. So in a video about choice, I'll leave you with one more. If you ever have the option to experience Prey for yourself, the choice is simple.
We're gonna shake things up, like old times.